Well, it finally happened. The Carolina Panthers traded away Diontae Johnson. The only question is, do they get enough? We'll talk about it right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show here on YouTube and for listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council. We're typically on Wednesdays, I'm answering your weekly Wednesday mailbag questions, and it's possible later on this week I'll get to some of those questions. Hate to ask for them and not get to them on the show, but when the Panthers have some big breaking news in the middle of the week and you're a week away from the trade deadline, kind of got to talk about that, even though putting this out on a Tuesday, it's the Wednesday episode here on Locked On Panthers. Either way, still follow me on Twitter at Julian Council, still at me, still DM me, send in some questions. Maybe I'll answer them on Fridays. That's what I typically do in the off season. So get those questions into me at Julian Council on Twitter. By the way, today's episode of Locked On Panthers is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. The Carolina Panthers have traded away their top wide receiver, Diontae Johnson, to the Baltimore Ravens. The Panthers get a 5th-round pick, while the Ravens get Johnson and a 6th-round pick. And that 6th-round pick from Carolina and that 5th-round pick from Baltimore are both in 2025. It is just a pick swap, and Diontae Johnson going to the Ravens. And I bet when you saw that, and if you hadn't heard it about now, you're wondering, that's it? That's all? Carolina went out there and traded for Diontae Johnson in the offseason for Pittsburgh, got a number 1 wide receiver. He played well in a couple of games, and the best you could do was a pick swap and get a 5th-round pick. And looking over at our favorite website here on Locked On Panthers, Tankathon.com, the Carolina Panthers have the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft, meaning they would have the top pick in the 6th round right now. The Baltimore Ravens are sitting there at 23rd overall, and they have 8 compensatory picks, understand this, at the end of the 5th round. So the Panthers currently, the pick that they own from Baltimore is only 18 picks higher than the one that they are sending over at the top of the 6th round to the Baltimore Ravens through the first 8 weeks of the season. And it will certainly change. I think the Ravens are a team that, I know Pittsburgh looking good with Russell Wilson in there, won on Monday night, in first place in the division in the AFC North. I still feel like Baltimore is the best team in that division. I think that they're at least going to be an AFC title contender, actually playing on Championship Sunday again. So the Panthers are only going to get a pick that's about 10, 12, 15 picks higher than the one that they had. And that seems to be pretty disappointing. Now, Mike Kay of the Charlotte Observer, love Mike, think he does a great job, did add some pretty needed perspective over on Twitter, where he said last week a league source told the Charlotte Observer the Panthers' asking price was a 3rd-round pick. And that's the asking price that I would have had as well. And that's also what you and I and everyone involved would have liked to see the Carolina Panthers get in exchange of Diontae Johnson. But the Steelers essentially pegged Johnson's value as a 6th-round pick in their March swap of Carolina. With 9 games left on his deal and only a trio of standout games, value didn't go up for Diontae Johnson, according to Mike Kay. And I think that's a pretty astute point. The Panthers sent a 6th, and really it was they sent Diontae Jackson, and they swapped a 6th for a 7th. So the Steelers got a starting corner, a player Carolina was going to cut anyways, and a 6th-round pick for Diontae Johnson, where the Panthers got their number 1 wide receiver in a 7th-round pick that ended up being Michael Barrett. Then he was traded over to Seattle for Mike Jackson. And we'll get to how all this comes to the end with who's actually here in Carolina now, going back to this trade back in March. So 6th-round pick, effectively, that they gave up to get Diontae Johnson back in the spring, and they at least get a 5th. So they do move up, albeit only a couple of spots in the draft place with their 6th round pick out going to Baltimore in exchange for Baltimore's 5th round pick. And you have to wonder too, as this is another thing about it, Jeff Zrebiec, I try to pronounce his name right. Jeff Zrebiec of the Baltimore, well, he actually covers the Ravens for The Athletic. He came out and reported this. Panthers are also paying down some of Diontae Johnson's remaining salary of $3.5 million. So the Ravens only owe him $625K the rest of the year. So the Panthers paying about $2.9 million to get rid of Diontae Johnson and only getting right now a pick 18 spots higher than the pick they would have if the draft were to be today. And if we get all the way to April and both teams finish off where they're at currently heading into the week 9 matchup this weekend. Like that is discouraging, certainly, if you're a Panther fan, hoping the Panthers were going to get some compensation for one of their higher value asset players who was on a trade block, and he has been on a trade block for weeks. And Jonathan Jones, he reported that. We've heard from Joe Person reporting that as well. Mike Hayes reported the Panthers have been wanting to find a good deal for Diontae Johnson, and this is the best that Dan Morgan and Brant Tillis could come up with over the last couple of weeks. So why is that? Did the Panthers want him gone? Did they feel like he was a cancer in the locker room and that it was just time to move on? Now, from an exchange I had with somebody earlier today on Tuesday, I asked, was he becoming a pain in the ass? And the person told me, yes. Effectively, that was the issue. And Jonathan Jones, CBS Sports, used to cover this team. He spoke with a source, and he won CBS Sports HQ, and he said his source told him there were communication issues in Carolina between the staff, the quarterbacks, and Diontae Johnson. And speaking of communication issues, we saw the last game we saw him play, he broke off a route, Andy Dalton gets picked off, and he's clearly upset. And Dave Canales at no point comes out and says it was on Diontae Johnson, when very clearly it was on Diontae Johnson. And we saw some of the answers he had after the first 2 weeks of the season. Very clearly, Diontae Johnson was frustrated with Bryce Young. And these aren't necessarily new things. We talked about this back in March in Pittsburgh. He had some words to say to Mitch Trubisky at halftime of one game about how he was playing. There were some issues as far as, was he a team guy there in Pittsburgh? And you have to wonder this. How many guys who have left Pittsburgh because Mike Tomlin was done with them, how many of them have gone on to have success elsewhere? Antonio Brown didn't work out, and he had a host of problems. Le'Veon Bell didn't work out for him either. Chase Claypool, and at least in his first stop post-Pittsburgh, Diontae Johnson had 3 good games, but other than that, didn't make a big enough impact to stick around. And, of course, Panthers aren't winning games. So I'm thinking it's probably a sign when Mike Tomlin is done with a guy that may not be someone that you want to sign up for. But Carolina's sitting in a situation where they had the worst receiver group in the NFL heading into free agency after a putrid season last year, and they couldn't really be too discerning about who they wanted to bring onto this roster. They wanted to bring in Diontae Johnson to help Bryce Young. And I remember telling y'all back then, as long as he's getting the ball and the team is competitive, he'll be happy. But he wasn't getting the ball in certain situations. The team has not been competitive, and it appears that he has not been happy. And here's the thing, too, about it. Looking at the injury report the last couple of weeks. Last week, heading into that game against Denver, he was a DNP all week with a rib injury that popped up out of nowhere. And I question, was that actually a rib injury, or was he just wanting to sit back and let his agent figure it out with the Panthers to find him a new home? Feels like that was the case sitting here today, now that Diontae Johnson's no longer a Carolina Panther. Go back to the week prior to that. He was a DNP and a limited participant with a rib, hamstring, and ankle injury. The week prior to that, he was a limited participant all throughout the week with an ankle, did play in that game. Before that, he was a DNP, and he was a limited participant. Week 5 with an ankle injury. Week 4, DNP, LP with a groin. Diontae Johnson over the last 5 weeks has missed 7 practices and has been a full participant no times since week 3. Week 3, the last time Diontae Johnson has been a full participant at practice. And I'm not saying that these injuries weren't legitimate, but at some point in time, you got to wonder, was there frustration among the coaching staff that they weren't able to have Diontae out there full time? And that last week, all of a sudden, it feels like there's an injury that really wasn't an injury in weeks past. So I just question, was he becoming someone that this staff did not want to deal with when they did a pick swap and are paying the majority of his remaining salary for the final 9 weeks of the season? And understand, too, like, how likely was Diontae Johnson to resign here in Carolina? The Panthers 1-7. Dave Canales has no faith in the quarterback, Bryce Young, and rightfully so. And maybe he's not doing his job by helping him and coaching him up. Either way, has no faith in Bryce Young, and Bryce is on the bench. Maybe starting if Andy Dalton's not healthy on Sunday, but if Andy's healthy, he's probably going to start. Andy Dalton, also a free agent after this year. The Panthers are 1-7. Johnson's on an expiring deal, and they don't know who their quarterback's going to be. Was he really going to re-sign at the end of the day? Now, you would prefer to actually gain a pick instead of moving up in the draft that you're going to trade it away, which they did, but this is where they're sitting at. So the compensation, they moved up 18 spots as of right now. And looking at all this in totality, in the end, the Carolina Panthers traded Diontae Jackson, a starting quarterback they plan to cut for Diontae Johnson, a much-needed starting wide receiver. They also swapped their 6th-round pick with Pittsburgh for a 7th-round pick. The Panthers used that 7th-round pick to draft Michael Barrett out of Michigan, who they then traded to Seattle for Mike Jackson, another starting quarterback who they needed after Dane Jackson went out with a hamstring injury and was going to miss the first couple weeks of the season. Mike Jackson has started all 8 games so far for Carolina, while Dane Jackson has played in only 1. So after 7 games played, that is, the Panthers traded away Diontae Johnson. So ultimately, Diontae Johnson, Michael Barrett are no longer with the Carolina Panthers. The only player still connected to that trade back in March who remains on the roster is Mike Jackson. And the Panthers, by the way, are 1-7. So the Panthers got rid of Diontae Jackson, did a pick swap to get Diontae Johnson, to draft Michael Barrett, to then send him to Seattle for Mike Jackson. That's what they did all this for. All that movement led them to Mike Jackson. And you wonder why the Carolina Panthers were a bad football team. Now, what does the draft compensation look like now that they have this extra 5th-round pick? And who's next? Who's the next person out of town here in Carolina? We'll talk about it here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. Listen up, renters. Ever feel like you're stuck in this loop of rent payments, just watching your money vanish into thin air? It's time to turn that rent game around and start earning some serious rewards. That's where Built Rewards comes in. Built is breaking ground as a neighborhood rewards program that hooks you up with points on your reward. Every month, pay your rent and watch the Built points roll in. Use points to jet off on a dream vacation. Put your points towards a flight or a hotel stay with 500-plus airlines and 700,000-plus hotels and properties. You can also use your points to book fitness studio classes, redeem them towards a future rent payment. They're designed to meet your lifestyle. Pay rent hassle-free through the Built Rewards app. Your rent game just got a major upgrade. Built points have been consistently ranked the highest value point currency by the Points Guys and Bankrate. Earn points by paying rent right now when you go to join built.com/LockedOnNFL. That's JOINBILT.com/LockedOnNFL. Make sure to use our URL so they know we sent you. Join built.com/LockedOnNFL to start earning points with your rent payments today. Taking a look at the updated compensation for the Carolina Panthers heading into the 2025 draft. And understand, we have a long way to go, and I do think Carolina will add to this. They have 9 picks overall. Their own 1st-round pick, which is right now the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. Do not ask me what they should do with it. We'll talk about that after the season's over. They have the Rams 2nd-round pick, which a couple weeks ago looked like was going to be a very high pick there in the 2nd round. Right now, maybe not. They're getting healthier, and the NFC West is wide open. The Panthers also have their own 3rd-round pick, which is a top of the 3rd round, their own 4th-round pick, which once again would be a top of the 4th round, their own 5th-round pick. They also have the Giants' 5th-round pick, which should be pretty high up in the 5th round. They have a 3rd 5th-round pick thanks to the pick swap by sending Diontae Johnson to the Ravens, and the Ravens giving the Panthers their 5th round, the Panthers giving the Ravens their 6th-rounder, which right now, through 8 weeks in the season, is 18 picks higher than where Carolina was going to be sitting in the 6th. They do not have a pick in the 6th round. Dan Morgan likes to have a pick in every round. Don't know how necessary it is to have a 6th-round pick right now when you have 3 in the 5th round. Would like to get a little bit higher. And understand this, too. They could possibly use some of those picks they have in the 5th round to trade up and to get some better players earlier on in the top 100 of the draft. And then they're either going to have their own 7th-round pick, unless it's lower than Arizona's, or Arizona's 7th-round pick, unless it's lower to Carolina's. the Chiefs will get the higher of the 2 sevenths, but only one of them. And the Panthers also have Kansas City 7. So they have 2 sevenths, 3 fifths, 1 fourth, 1 third, 1 second, and 1 fifth. 9 picks overall looking at 2025. And I believe they will add to that possibly over the next week as the Panthers and the rest of the NFL count down to the trade deadline next Tuesday, November 5th at 4 p.m. And I was looking at it. I fly out to Munich on Monday night, get there at 9:15 a.m. on Tuesday. And the time change, the trade deadline, 4 Eastern, that's not until 10 o'clock over there. So I don't know if I'm going to be up waiting for the trade deadline. I think the Panthers, like they did on Tuesday by trading Diontae Johnson to Baltimore, they're going to do the rest of their business the rest of this week. And if anything, on Monday, they're not going to wait till Tuesday. I don't believe they're going to wait until Tuesday and say, actually, we're going to leave you here on the tarmac at Charlotte Douglas, and you're going to go fly somewhere else and go play for a different team. I don't know if they're going to wait that long to make another trade or to finalize their trade decisions. It feels like to me, Friday should be the deadline to make any sort of move or Saturday, possibly really Friday. Either one of those days should be the deadline for Carolina to get a deal done. Now, looking at other players that have been mentioned, and that would make sense. Jadeveon Clowney, Dan Rossini, we talked about it on yesterday's show, mentioned on Sunday morning for teams looking for a pass rusher, looking at you, Detroit Lions. Jadeveon Clowney would be a guy that makes sense. There's also Zaire Smith up there in Cleveland, who has been a better pass rusher than Clowney this year and a lot of years in the past. He would be an option if they want to try to replace Aiden Hutchinson in the way that the Lions are playing. Who's to say Aiden Hutchinson is not back at some point during the playoffs? Because they're going to be playing for a very, very long time based off of what they're doing to teams in the NFL right now. Clowney, don't think he's had that big of an impact. Was really good on Sunday against the run, has 1 sack. You can probably ask me right now and say, well, how does that help the pass rush in Carolina? What is he doing to the pass rush right now anyways? Like, they were bad last year with Brian Burns, and they are just so much worse without Brian Burns by swapping him with Clowney. And eventually they're going to get DJ Wooden back. Probably not until the Chiefs game after the bye, once they get back from Munich, and we'll see what he's able to provide. I don't think it's going to get any better either way. And they certainly overpaid for Clowney. Maybe Detroit is desperate enough to go pick up the rest of that salary. Carolina may have to pay some of it, but if it yields some draft picks that can help them down the road, that is a good thing, as he's not a player I would think is likely going to stick around next season. We'll see. He talked about when he signed a contract, he looks at every deal as a 1-year deal because the team could come back and say, we're done here, or the player could say, I want a new contract. So it was always a 1-year proposition, at least in his mind. And maybe it was only an 8-week, 6-game proposition, depending on how things play out over the next couple of days. Adam Thielen is the other one we're looking at here. He's been mentioned as far as trade talks go. The tricky thing about it is, had the hamstring injury, was not able to play last week. I wondered, like with Diontae Johnson, is that because the Panthers are trying to preserve him to trade him elsewhere? And it would be great for Adam, as well as he played last year. Been a good teammate, been a good leader here in Carolina, even if it's only been for, 20 games that he's played. Why not get this guy an opportunity to go be with a contender? Like, if anyone deserved to be with a contender, it was him going to Baltimore, more so than Diontae Johnson going to Baltimore. And I'm not trying to sit here and talk bad about his character, just that the guy's a pain in Pittsburgh. Sounded like he was a pain here in Carolina as well from people I've talked to and just all the other reporting out there. Adam Thielen has not been a pain. Yes, he had a meltdown week 2. And I never thought I would see Adam Thielen have a meltdown out there on the field. We saw it. The guy cares. We saw last year, he still got some juice. I don't know how much juice he has right now with the hamstring now being 34 years old. Would love to see him find a better situation. But if not, there is some value to keeping him around with some younger guys like Jalen Coker and Xavier Legette, now stepping into truly the top receiver roles like we saw on Sunday in Denver. Miles Sanders, another name. Jonathan Brooks, he's going to be returning at some point in time. Maybe this Sunday. I think probably would be next week. Or they could still just slow play it. They don't have to play him. They just have to activate him off of the non-football injury list, as he is already in that 21-day window. They would just need to activate him next week or this week, and he can just be inactive if the Panthers want to do that. But we know eventually he's going to make his return here pretty doggone soon, and Miles Sanders has been relegated to a back you throw the ball to out of the backfield. And Chuba Hubbard's been able to do some of that. Jonathan Brooks, certainly, from what we saw at Texas and what he's been billed to be, he can do a lot of that. Do you need Miles Sanders? He's going to be someone you cut after the season anyways. Does the team want to pick him up? Well, we'll find out, but that would be another trade to make. And Jonathan Bingo, if Thielen's gone, then maybe you stick around and hope for the best. But we have clearly seen that Mingo is just not going to be a guy here for Carolina that's going to help him down the road. Legette has shown some signs. Got to catch the football, though. Coker has really been pretty damn good. I had someone send me some PFF numbers. He's been like the highest graded player on offense the last couple of weeks, and he's highly graded among wide receivers in the NFL, period, when you take off the snap count limit. So that's a good start for the UDFA at a Holy Cross. So there's options there if they want to go ahead and trade some receivers. And in the final one's Bryce Young. I don't know how much value there really is trading Bryce Young right now after Sunday. We don't know if Andy Dalton's healthy enough to play. And if Andy goes down, do they really want to have just Jack Plummer be the backup? And I guess there's an argument to see Jack Plummer play and see if he has anything. I highly doubt it from what I saw from him at Louisville last year. When I saw from him for the majority of the preseason, it was nice to see how he played against the Bills 2s and 3s in that dress rehearsal game. But still, I don't think Jack Plummer is necessarily a guy who should be starting in the NFL in 2024. Maybe down the line, he gets an opportunity to start somewhere. I just don't think it should be this year. Do you want it to be that situation? Does it really matter? I guess not. And if Dave Canales is not interested in playing Bryce Young because he clearly does not believe in him, shouldn't the Panthers just go ahead and move on from him? I think there's probably more value to keep him around, whether he's going to be the backup or not. Because at the end of the season, teams are going to look around the league and see what their options are at quarterback. And they're also looking at this draft class coming up, and they're probably thinking to themselves, all right, Carson Beck has been terrible in the big games against Alabama and against Texas on the road. They're also looking at Quinn Ewers, who has not looked the same since he had that oblique injury and missed a couple games. And that's not a great situation. Shedeur Sanders been really good, but Dion is already saying that Shedeur and Travis Hunter, and that's something to note, Carolina Panther fans, that he's not going to let them just go to any organization. He's going to pull a Manning, which Travis Hunter's not even his son. And Dion's out here being like, I'm not going to let him go to a bad franchise. Well, here's a bad franchise right here in Carolina. So teams may not have the kind of options they want to have at quarterback. Like, I don't think Jackson Dart is somebody like Drew Aller, maybe Cade Klubnik, who's actually played pretty well at Clemson. Like, this is not a great quarterback draft class, which means teams may be a little bit more desperate to go get somebody like Bryce Young, who they probably had highly evaluated 18 months ago, and someone who has actual experience in the NFL and clearly needs a fresh start. Great argument to say that he's never going to be any good, but there's also pretty good argument made that he just needs a fresh start and a better situation around him and that he could actually have success. I see it both ways. Probably leaning more to this way of him probably never being good than I was leaning the other way not too long ago. But it's probably over here in Carolina. Not probably, but certainly it's going to be over at some point in time. I just think that if they're going to get anything from him that is the best return, if you feel like there's any value at all, and if there is any value at all, it would be after the season when teams are truly evaluating their options. Right now, what's he going to do? Going to go back up somebody? He's not going to play. So that's where they stand. I think a move for Sanders, likely the most logical move remaining if a team wants to make it. Panthers are going to have to eat some of that salary too, I'd imagine. Bryce, I don't think that makes sense right now. Mingo would make sense. Thielen would, but maybe less sense now that they've already traded away Diontae Johnson. Do you want to leave your receiver core that thin? Well, they got to play. And Adam Thielen's not a part of the long-term future in Carolina. Xavier Legette, Jalen Coker, those are two guys that look like they are. So we'll see what they do, but we'll be obviously monitoring that, and I'll come up here and talk about it whenever that happens. But I expect them to make at least one more move, and fingers crossed that move gives them some picks. And if it's just a 6-rounder replacing the one that they sent to Baltimore today, I don't know how happy people will actually be. But look around, Clowney, Thielen, Sanders, Young, Mingo. How much you're realistically getting for any of those guys at this point in time heading into the deadline. Just thought, you can always use those picks later to get in a better situation, but not that attractive. Okay, so what now, wide receiver? And is a youth movement beginning here in Carolina? We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Diontae Johnson is no longer a Carolina Panther. He is a Baltimore Raven and has realistic hopes to win a Super Bowl this year, as Lamar Jackson has been outstanding and John Harbaugh continues to be one of the best coaches in the NFL. So now that Diontae Johnson is no longer in Carolina, what does that mean for the rest of the wide receiver core heading into this Week 9 matchup against New Orleans Saints here in Uptown Charlotte at Bank of America Stadium? What it means is it's XL and Jalen Coker time, baby. We saw it on Sunday. Legette got a touchdown. Coker got a touchdown. The future, it's here. It's here. So that's the thing about it moving forward. You got to just look at the young guys who were drafted by this staff once Canales got here and once Morgan moved down the hall to a different office occupied by his old buddy Scott Bitter. You got to look at the guys that have come in this offseason and look at how they performed this year and really hope for the best. Looking back at 2022, or 3 rather, I mean, really 2 as well. 3, draft class has not been great. Bryce Young, it's not working out. It's not going to work out, I don't believe, here in Carolina. Jonathan Mingo, I can say with absolute certainty, that's not going to work out. We have not really seen Chandler Zavala that much, although he has improved, which is a good thing. Diontae Johnson, yeah, not going to work out. And then Jamie Robinson would have had an opportunity on Sunday to start at safety, but he was injured with a knee injury. Damani Richardson stepped in there. And quite honestly, if you watch Damani Richardson back in the preseason, even training camp, and we've watched what we've seen from Jamie Robinson, feels like Damani Richardson's a better player anyways. So that entire 2023 draft class, sans, I think Zavala, which after last year, I don't think anyone would have been saying that he's the best player out of that draft class. Certainly feels that way when he got an opportunity this year, and that's a good thing. Development, backup guy, maybe one day, probably not, based on how much they paid Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis and how well they played so far here in Carolina. But that 2023 draft class has been a wash. But so far, this draft class, Xavier Legette, getting some valuable snaps, scoring some touchdowns, riding dollar bill. Love to see it. Jalen Coker, who wasn't drafted, has come up and he's played well so far. Second round, we have not seen Jonathan Brooks. Trevin Wallace has stepped in to that linebacker position in the middle, replacing Shaq Thompson. And I think he's had pretty encouraging start to his career. Charles Smith-Wade, not so much right now, but give it some time. JT Sanders, big game against Washington. Only got 1 target on Sunday against Denver. Good defense. He's going to get more opportunities in the pass game, especially if they move on from Thielen. Really Thielen. Mingo, it doesn't even matter. But if they move on from Adam Thielen, he'll get more opportunities. Jaden Crumedy, he's going to step up at some point on the horizon. Michael Barrett, as we know, not here in Carolina. There are guys at least playing from this draft class back in the spring. The guys from 2023 aren't playing and they're not making an impact even when they do play, except for Chandler Zavala. So that's one of the things to look at moving forward is just the youth movement starting here in Carolina, where they got rid of Troy Hill. Charles Smith-Wade's out there. Damani Richardson, as I mentioned, got the start. Crumedy going to play soon. Brooks going to be back soon. If they move Miles Sanders out of here, even if they don't move Miles Sanders out of here, he's going to be getting those reps pretty quickly and possibly cutting into Chuba Hubbard snaps this season. Maybe Dave Canales decides, all right, Bryce, I'm going to give you a chance, again, to not upset me and to show me you actually can play the position, and he'll get to play, and we'll start to see what could, knock on wood, hopefully be the future here in Carolina. If not, well, at least we get to see Andy Dalton, the veteran, throw it to Legette and to Coker and to JT Sanders, and to see Charles Smith-Wade and Damani Richardson out there at corner and at safety, and Jaden Crumedy coming in to fill in for what has been a pretty bad defensive line this season, and really would like to see him actually be a good player for them in Jonathan Brooks. But there are still things to look at when it comes to the younger players here on this roster that can give you some hope for the future. It won't matter if the Panthers don't eventually get a quarterback, and it won't matter too if they don't have the right head coach. And as I've stated over the last couple of shows, I have my questions, and I'm certainly not impressed through 8 games. But that's not a blanket statement saying that Dave Canales is not going to work. It's still early. He's still learning on the job. Just saying, not impressed through 8 games. And how could you be when they're 1-7 and they're not competitive? And the guy that we thought he was coming here to fix got benched after 2 weeks and didn't look all that great on Sunday. And the play calling didn't seem to offer much help either because, well, he doesn't believe in him. So there are some things to look at moving forward. Coker, Legette, their time to shine at wide receiver. Thielen will come back. I think it would be nice to keep him around just to be a veteran presence. Would love it for Adams to actually get out of here, as it sounded like out in Russer, locker room cut down day, rather, locker room exit cleanout. Locker room cleanout day back in January following the 2023 regular season that he did not want to stick around. And I'm guessing he probably doesn't want to stick around, even if he loves Charlotte, which sounds like him and his family do. We'll see what moves are made, but the youth movement is beginning here in Carolina, and maybe it works this time. All right, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe, follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, and be sure to follow me on Twitter at Julian Council, where typically I would have sat here on a Wednesday and answered your weekly Wednesday mailbag questions, but big news happened, and I know I recorded this and released this on Tuesday, but understand, it's basically Wednesday's show. Maybe get to the question at the end of the week. Certainly we'll get into next week, unless I have another big trade next Tuesday, but I'm going to answer your questions, y'all. So at me, DM me. I usually get to you through your DMs, even if I don't have those questions explicitly on the show. But in the meantime, be safe. Be happy, be whole as always, and forever keep pounding. And I'll be back with you on Thursday for a Locked On NFL Crossover Thursday presented by our friends over at Prize Picks with the host of Locked On Saints, Ross Jackson.